Imagine 1916, mud, barbed wire, trenches stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Soldiers haven't moved forward a single meter in months. Machine guns mow down everything in sight. It feels like this war will never end. And then, out of the fog, something crawls forward that no one has ever seen before. A diamond-shaped iron machine that rolls over trenches, crushes wire, and doesn't stop for bullets. German soldiers run, not because they fear death. They fear what they don't understand. That was the birth of the tank, and from that day forward, it never stopped evolving. Today we're going to walk the full journey, from that clumsy iron box to the modern Abrams, a machine that is less a vehicle and more a supercomputer on tracks. 100 years of evolution, blood, engineering genius, and warfare rewritten from scratch. Let's go. World War I had turned into a nightmare nobody predicted. The entire Western Front was frozen, not by winter, but by the brutal logic of trench warfare. Generals threw wave after wave of infantry at machine gun nests and got nothing but body counts in return. The British needed a solution, and in the workshops of the Landships Committee, a radical idea took shape. An armored vehicle that could cross trenches, resist bullets, and suppress enemy fire. To keep the project secret, workers were told they were building water carriers for the desert. Tanks. The code name stuck forever. The Mark I rolled onto the battlefield at the Somme on September 15th, 1916. It weighed 28 tons, moved at a spine-rattling 6 kilometers per hour, and had a crew of 8 men sweating in temperatures that reached 50 degrees Celsius inside. It broke down constantly. It ditched in trenches. It was, by any modern standard, a mechanical disaster. But it worked. Psychologically, it shattered the enemy. Tactically, it proved that armor could move where infantry could not. The age of the tank had begun. Not with a triumph, but with a promise. After the Great War, every major military power looked at tanks and asked the same question. What exactly are these things for? The answers were wildly different. The British and French, who had won with tanks, largely saw them as infantry support weapons. Slow, heavy shields to walk alongside foot soldiers. The Germans, who had lost partly because of tanks, studied them obsessively and came to a completely different conclusion. Enter Heinz Guderian. While Western armies argued over tactics in conference rooms, Guderian was sketching the blueprint for Blitzkrieg. Lightning War. His idea was radical. Mass tanks together, move fast, strike deep. Don't wait for infantry. Use speed as the weapon. Bypass strong points, collapse command structures, create chaos behind enemy lines before the enemy can react. When World War II began in 1939, the world found out who was right. German panzer divisions tore through Poland in weeks. France, with more tanks than Germany and thicker armor, fell in 44 days, largely because their tanks were scattered, slow, and commanded by generals still thinking in 1918 terms. The tank wasn't just a vehicle, it was a doctrine, and doctrine mattered more than steel. If any single moment defined tank warfare in the 20th century, it was July 1943, the fields near Prokhorovka in the Soviet Union, Operation Citadel, the largest tank battle in history. The German Tiger and Panther tanks were engineering marvels. Thick armor, accurate long-range guns, genuinely terrifying on a one-to-one basis. The Soviet T-34 was rougher, simpler, and easier to mass-produce. The Soviets didn't try to outgun the Tiger. They overwhelmed it with numbers, tactics, and logistics. The T-34 became the most produced tank in history. Over 80,000 units built. It was fast, reliable enough, and crucially, it could be driven by a conscript after a few weeks of training. In a total war, that was a more important feature than a better gun. Meanwhile, On the other side of the world, American Shermans were island hopping across the Pacific, often fighting in conditions no European tank designer had ever imagined. Jungle terrain, volcanic rock, coral beaches, adaptability was becoming as important as firepower. By 1945, the lesson was clear. The best tank was not necessarily the most powerful one. It was the one that fit its war. The Cold War changed everything about how tanks were designed. With the threat of nuclear warfare looming, armies wanted tanks that could fight through contaminated zones, move fast across the European plains, and survive on a battlefield that might turn radioactive at any moment. The Soviet T-54 and later the T-72 became the backbone of the Warsaw Pact, simple, cheap, and produced in staggering numbers. NATO responded with increasingly sophisticated designs: the British Centurion, the German Leopard 1, and eventually the American M60. But the real revolution came in the 1970s and 80s, when a new generation of tanks arrived that would define armored warfare for decades: the Leopard 2, the British Challenger, and in America, the M1 Abrams. These weren't just upgraded versions of World War II designs. They were fundamentally different machines. Composite armor, replacing solid steel, could stop rounds that would punch straight through anything that came before. Smoothbore guns firing fin-stabilized rounds turned tank gunnery from an art into a science. Thermal sights meant you could see and kill the enemy in complete darkness. The tank had gained eyes in the night, and that changed everything. For years, military analysts debated how a modern tank war would actually play out. On February 24, 1991, they got their answer. Operation Desert Storm's ground phase lasted 100 hours. American M1A1. Abrams tanks, equipped with thermal sights and advanced fire control systems, engaged Iraqi T-72s, themselves considered a serious threat, at ranges up to 3,000 meters. In several engagements, American crews destroyed enemy tanks before the Iraqis even knew they were under fire. The results were staggering. The U.S. Army lost 23 tanks to all causes. The Iraqis lost over 4,000. It wasn't a battle, it was a demonstration. The gap between first-generation Cold War armor and third-generation Western tanks wasn't just technological, it was existential. The Abrams hadn't just won, it had announced a new era. Today's Abrams, in its M1A2 SEPV3 variant, would be unrecognizable to the crew of a Mark I. It weighs 73 tons. Its turbine engine produces 1,500 horsepower. It can hit a moving target at over 2 miles, while itself moving at 40 miles per hour, in the dark, in a sandstorm. But the most important changes aren't mechanical. They're digital. Modern tanks are network nodes. They share targeting data in real time with aircraft, artillery, and command centers. Onboard computers manage ammunition types, track battlefield positions, and monitor vehicle health. The commander and gunner each have independent thermal sights. The tank sees the battlefield in ways no human eye can. And yet, as the war in Ukraine has shown, the modern tank faces new challenges that no amount of armor alone can solve. Drones costing a few $100s have destroyed tanks worth millions. The answer isn't to abandon the tank. It's to evolve, again. Active protection systems, electronic warfare suites, drone hunting capabilities are already being integrated into the next generation of designs. Closing. 100 years ago, a terrified German soldier stared at a diamond-shaped iron box and ran. Today, that box has become a 73-ton digital predator with eyes that see in the dark, a brain that calculates trajectories in milliseconds, and armor that laughs at what would have been a war-winning weapon in 1944. But the core idea, it's still the same: protected firepower, mobility, shock. The tank didn't just survive a century of warfare, it shaped it, and it's not done yet.